They say some people enter your life and change everything. But what if it's not them you remember? What if it's the part of yourself they quietly woke up? This isn't about heartbreak or longing. This is about awakening, the kind that rattles your core and refuses to let you go back to who you were. It's not because they said something profound or did something extraordinary. It's because their presence stirred a truth inside you that you didn't even know you'd buried, a part of you that had been asleep, until they arrived. The Stoics spoke of the inner citadel, that sacred, untouchable center within each of us. Most people live their entire lives without ever stepping inside. But every now and then, someone crosses your path who doesn't knock on the door. They simply speak to what's already living inside. And in that moment, you don't just see them, you see yourself, maybe for the first time. That's the kind of presence we're diving into today, the kind that doesn't fade because it never lived on the surface to begin with. It lived in the soul. So if you've ever felt someone linger in your thoughts long after they left your life, if you've ever wondered why a seemingly brief connection refused to die quietly, stay with me. Because what we're talking about isn't romance, it's recognition. And if this resonates with you, if this space is stirring something that feels real and rare, there's just one small, free favor I'll ask. Hit that subscribe button. You'll be joining a community that values presence over performance, depth over noise, and real conversations rooted in clarity, meaning, and a touch of Stoic wisdom. Now, let's go a little deeper. Why does someone stay inside us even after the story ends? Long after the last word was spoken, long after life moved forward, they're still there. Quietly, invisibly, yet undeniably present. It's not because of a message left unread or a moment that didn't get closure. It's because the connection wasn't made on the surface. You didn't just cross paths with them. You entered something far deeper, beneath logic, beneath labels, into the space where meaning lives. Carl Jung once described the unconscious as a reservoir, not just of forgotten memories, but of truths that were never fully seen in the first place. And when your presence stirs that reservoir, when you awaken something that had been sleeping for years, you don't just become part of someone's story, you become part of their structure. Not just a name, not just a face, but a symbol, a living memory of what was once buried and now refuses to go quiet again. And that's the thing. It's not about time spent or words exchanged. Sometimes it's not even about what you shared. It's about how your presence landed in them, how it reverberated in the parts of their being they never usually feel. That's why it's not always the loudest person we remember, not the one who stayed the longest. It's the one who struck the deepest chord, the one whose silence echoes just as loudly as their words once did. Plato said that every soul has a companion, cut from the same whole, longing to be reunited. And while not every connection is eternal, some feel like they stretch across time, as if you didn't meet them for the first time but remembered them. That sense of familiarity that makes no sense. The comfort in their presence that requires no explanation. These aren't accidents. They're moments when something ancient recognizes itself in someone else. So when you awaken that feeling in someone, when you reflect something they didn't know they'd hidden, you don't just pass through. You remain. Maybe not physically, maybe not publicly, but emotionally, psychologically, soulfully. Because you weren't just another person to them. You were the one who made them feel like home and disruption at the same time. Socrates once said that the unexamined life is not worth living. But not everyone is ready to examine their life until someone comes along and shines a light into the dark corners. You didn't do it intentionally. You were just being yourself. Yet somehow, your energy challenged them. It brought clarity. or confusion, or both. And that friction doesn't fade easily, because it's the kind of friction that creates movement, the kind that makes people question who they are and who they could be. That's the kind of presence that stays, the one that lives beyond logic, the one that lingers in someone's thoughts when they're quiet, not because they're clinging to the past, but because they're still trying to understand what you revealed. You didn't offer answers, you offered a mirror, a glimpse into a version of themselves they hadn't yet dared to face. Sometimes, knowing yourself doesn't begin with solitude. It begins with someone else. Someone who doesn't just see your surface, but speaks to your depth without even trying. You became that catalyst, not a teacher, not a savior, but a spark. And once the soul has been sparked, it doesn't go back to sleep easily. So even when they're gone, even when you've moved on in different directions, that energy doesn't disappear. Because resonance isn't ruled by distance, it's ruled by memory, by meaning, by the quiet unfolding of something much bigger than words. You became part of their unfolding, part of the journey they didn't know they were on until you crossed their path. And maybe they never tell you, maybe they don't even fully understand it themselves, but something shifted, something moved, and in that movement you became unforgettable, not because you tried to be, but because your presence reached a place they hadn't yet explored, and now that place has a name, yours. This type of connection doesn't come gently. It doesn't ask for permission or wait for the right timing. It slips in unnoticed, like a breeze through a half-open window, and then echoes like thunder across the quiet places inside someone's soul. One moment, they feel steady, composed, in control. The next, they're unsettled, not by chaos, but by clarity, because something in your presence touched a part of them that wasn't prepared to feel. It wasn't your words that moved them. It was what those words carried, the silence between sentences, the way you existed without performing. That's where the shift happened, in the unspoken. The energy they felt in the room with you wasn't loud, but it was undeniable. Something deep stirred. And from that moment, even if everything on the outside looked the same, their inner world had already started to change. You didn't give them ease, you gave them a mirror. And that mirror didn't reflect who they pretended to be, or who they had convinced the world they were. It showed them something raw, something they'd hidden even from themselves, their fragility, their quiet hunger for connection, the ache of being unseen for so long, even in rooms full of people. Carl Jung once wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And that's why your presence felt so disruptive. You didn't give them something to chase. You gave them something to face. And for someone who's spent their life staying distracted, that kind of presence can feel overwhelming, not because it's harmful, but because it's honest. They may not even realize it right away. The impact of real presence is rarely immediate. It seeps in, like water into dry ground. It sinks beneath the surface. And suddenly the things that used to satisfy them don't. The conversations that used to keep them entertained feel hollow. The roles they once played start to feel like costumes, because now they've seen something else, something deeper, and you were the one who held up the lens. Plato once said that the soul remembers truth. It doesn't learn it, it remembers. That's what your energy did. It reminded them, not of you necessarily, but of a version of themselves they hadn't felt in a long time, the one before the layers, before the performance, before the armor. That memory is what lingers. That feeling is what won't let them rest. You didn't do this through intensity or force. You did it simply by being. And in that being, they were confronted with their own emptiness, not as judgment, but as invitation to slow down, to look in, to reconnect. Aristotle believed that knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom, but very few people are brave enough to begin until someone comes along and unknowingly holds up the first piece of the puzzle. That's why your presence stayed. That's why they can't forget, because it wasn't just emotional, it was transformational. And the soul doesn't let go of the things that wake it up. It doesn't care whether it's convenient or logical or easy to explain. It holds on to the people, the moments, the energies that cracked it open, even just a little. You didn't just walk into their life, you walked into their internal world. And you didn't rearrange it with your hands, you shifted it with your essence. Not with noise, but with depth. Not with promises, but with reflection. And once someone sees who they really are in your eyes, it's nearly impossible for them to go back to who they were. Even if they try to forget, even if they pretend it didn't matter. Something changed, and deep down, they know it, because in your presence, they didn't feel like they had to explain themselves. They just were. And that kind of safety, that kind of resonance, it stays, quietly, persistently. Because once you've been seen, really seen, it's hard to unfeel it. And once someone has seen themselves through you, it's even harder to forget. They'll try to explain it away. Tell themselves it was a passing feeling, something they imagined or misread. They might even say it out loud, with confidence, as if repetition makes it true. But the soul isn't concerned with explanations. It doesn't operate through reason or logic. It operates through recognition. And once something is seen, it can't be unseen. You didn't just enter their life, you entered their awareness. And what you touched wasn't their mind, but something far more sacred and far more sensitive. You didn't complete them. That's the mistake people often make, thinking deep connection is about filling a void. But what really happened is this: you exposed the void. You didn't fix it or heal it, you revealed it. And that's why your presence mattered so much. Because in you, they saw the outline of something they hadn't known they were missing. Not a person, not a relationship, but a piece of themselves. The piece they've avoided, the one they've spent years distracting themselves from. That realization doesn't always bring people closer. Sometimes it pushes them away, because real truth, the kind that doesn't flatter the ego, the kind that invites real change, is terrifying. It's not gentle, it shakes things. And that shaking isn't always welcome, especially for someone who's built a stable life on top of unspoken stories, hidden fears, and well-rehearsed roles. When you arrive and stir that stillness, the initial response isn't always gratitude. Often it's retreat. When someone runs after feeling something deep with you, they're not running from you. They're running from the mirror you held up, from the sudden awareness that they are not as finished, as composed, as whole as they believed themselves to be. You didn't create that gap, you simply revealed it. And that revelation, it lingers, it follows them, not as an obsession, but as a quiet voice that starts speaking in moments they used to enjoy without question. Now even peace feels different. Something's been moved, dislodged. And while they might try to go back to how things were, the soul doesn't operate like a switch that can be turned off. It wants what it felt again, not you necessarily, but the state you awakened, the clarity, the ache, the truth. But knowing yourself isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it begins with crisis, with contradiction, with the sudden presence of someone who disrupts everything you thought you had figured out. That's what you were. Not an answer, a question. And questions that matter are rarely easy to sit with. They may silence you, block you, avoid places where they might run into your name or your voice, or even the thought of you. But avoidance is never healing. It's only postponement, because eventually they will come back to what was stirred. The soul doesn't forget what cracked it open. It doesn't let you pretend it never happened. So if they pulled away, If they vanished, if they made you feel like your depth was too much, it wasn't. It was exactly what their soul needed. But what the soul needs and what the mind is ready for are rarely the same. That's not on you. That's their journey. And maybe one day they'll return, not for closure, not to rewind, but because they finally arrived at the place where they can face what they saw in you, and more importantly, what they saw in themselves because of you. Socrates believed that an unexamined life is not worth living, but examining one's life requires courage. Most aren't ready until something or someone shows up and makes it impossible to avoid. That someone might have been you. And that kind of presence doesn't disappear with distance. It lives on, quietly shaping them from the inside out. In Jungian psychology, the psyche doesn't speak in words. It speaks in symbols, feelings, images, dreams, and patterns that the conscious mind often ignores. That's where you live now. Not as a name or a face, but as a symbol in their inner world. You became more than a person. You became a presence, something they carry, even in your absence. They won't always understand it. They may not even notice it at first, but suddenly you're there, showing up in ways that seem completely unrelated to you, in the lyrics of a song they didn't choose, in the scent of a place you've never stepped foot in moments of stillness that feel familiar for reasons they can't explain. That's not coincidence. That's how the unconscious tries to process what the mind can't make sense of. You didn't leave a memory. You left a myth, a symbol of something deeper, of something unspoken that their soul wasn't ready to name. And the strange part, the more they resist it, the stronger it becomes. Jung said, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size." The energy of your presence doesn't shrink just because they try to forget. It actually grows, taking new forms, attaching itself to dreams, metaphors, and fragments of thought. They might try to rationalize it, assign it to timing or projection or emotional confusion. But logic doesn't dissolve symbols. It only delays their integration. Because the psyche doesn't care about what makes sense. It cares about wholeness. And when someone has met a symbol of their own shadow, or their longing, or their unlived truth, it won't let go. Not because it's romantic, but because it's necessary. That's what you became. Necessary. Not to their daily routine, not to their plans, but to their growth. You awakened something dormant, something they now have to confront. Not you as a person, but you as a trigger, a turning point, a mirror that reflects everything they need to face but weren't ready to see. Plato spoke about how the soul remembers beauty, not just physical beauty, but the kind that aligns with something eternal inside us. He believed that when we encounter real beauty, it stirs the memory of truth. That's what your presence did. It stirred something. Not on the surface, but in the structure of who they thought they were. And symbols, real ones, don't go away. They evolve, they change shape, they show up again and again until they're finally understood. And when someone avoids facing what a symbol reveals, it doesn't disappear. It simply waits, quietly, until life brings them to their knees and they can't avoid it anymore. You didn't ask for this role. You didn't script the impact you would have. You were just being real, present. And that honesty turned you into a symbol of something much larger than you. Now they see you in silence, feel you in their own restlessness. And maybe they won't admit it. Maybe they'll never say a word. But their soul already knows. You became part of their unfolding, not because of desire, but because of necessity. And that's the kind of presence that doesn't fade. It transforms. It digs roots in the unconscious. Because once a symbol has been born in someone's psyche, it becomes part of their personal myth. And myths don't vanish. They're lived, they're wrestled with. and eventually they're integrated. As Carl Jung once said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And sometimes that journey begins with someone who didn't come to stay, but came to awaken. Have you ever tried to forget someone, only to feel them even more vividly the more you tried to push them away? You distract yourself, fill your days with noise, surround yourself with new faces, but there they are, still showing up in the quiet moments. Not because you want them there, but because something in you remembers. Not just the person, but the shift they caused. That's what happens when a connection moves past the surface and touches something much deeper. It becomes more than a memory. It becomes part of you. That's the thing about real energetic connection. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't obey the rules of logic or time. Carl Jung once said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." That transformation doesn't always look like a relationship. Sometimes it looks like a question that won't stop repeating itself inside your mind, a strange mix of longing and clarity, of absence that still feels alive. Soul energy doesn't respond to commands. You can't force it to shut down just because you've decided it's inconvenient. It doesn't follow your plans. It follows the deeper structure of your being. And when someone has entered that space, they don't just pass through, they imprint, they integrate, they become part of your internal landscape, the way a melody lingers after the music ends. You may go on with your life. You might not speak to them again. You might even convince yourself you've moved on. But inside, something still orbits the presence of what they represented. Not the surface traits, not their smile, not their voice, but the energy that came with them. The feeling they awakened in you. That's what sticks. Not affection, but activation. Plato once described this kind of resonance as the soul's memory of wholeness. He believed that when we recognize something powerful in another person, it's not because we're meeting them for the first time, but because our soul remembers them from somewhere far deeper than this moment. That familiarity, the strange kind that makes no sense yet feels undeniable, isn't accidental. It's a signal that something meaningful has occurred. And the most surprising part? That connection might not even have been dramatic. It may not have been full of intensity or fireworks. Sometimes it's subtle, a conversation that felt too short, a presence that lingered longer than it should have. But even in its simplicity, it left a mark. Because what they awakened in you wasn't about them, it was about a part of yourself you hadn't been in touch with. That's the real story. It's not just about missing someone, it's about what they revealed. And when someone reveals a truth about you, when their presence pulls you closer to something honest and raw inside yourself, that's not easily erased. Not because you're holding on, but because what they stirred continues to grow. The transformation they began in you keeps unfolding even without them there. Aristotle said that we are what we repeatedly do. And when someone shifts what we begin to repeat, how we think, feel, or see the world, they shape a new version of us. That kind of influence is rarely loud, but it's lasting, because when your inner world starts to change, even just a little, you start to see everything around you through a new lens, and the one who triggered that change becomes a reference point, a quiet marker of when things began to shift. So no, it wasn't just chemistry, it wasn't just timing, it was something deeper. It was resonance at the level of the soul, and once the soul has been touched like that, forgetting becomes impossible. Not because you're stuck in the past, but because the past has taken root in the present. And whether they ever return or not, whether you speak of them or keep it to yourself, their presence lives on in the transformation they left behind. Sometimes they come back, not for romance, not because they want to pick up where things left off. They come back because something inside them never fully left you. It's not always love they're chasing, it's clarity. Not about you, but about themselves. Because your presence didn't just stir feelings, it stirred awareness. And awareness doesn't sit still. There are moments in life when we meet someone and without realizing it, they become a mirror. Not a mirror of who we are now, but of who we could become if we stopped running from ourselves. You didn't just make them feel seen, you made them feel exposed, and not in a painful or dramatic way, but in a quiet, piercing way that lingers long after the moment has passed. Carl Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." But in your presence, they may have caught a glimpse of what that actually looks like, not perfection, but honesty. A kind of emotional nakedness they weren't used to, and when someone has spent years building layers to survive, layers of logic, strength, detachment, meeting someone who cuts straight through, that can feel both jarring and magnetic, they might have walked away, disappeared without a proper reason, or closed the door before they could fully understand why they opened it in the first place. But distance doesn't mean detachment. Sometimes, stepping away is the only way they know how to process what you triggered. Because what you brought up in them wasn't light, it was something buried, something waiting. Plato believed that learning is a process of remembering, that the soul already knows, and we simply awaken that knowing. That's what your presence did. It didn't teach them something new. It helped them remember something real, a deeper layer of themselves, one they had long forgotten how to access. And that memory now echoes inside them. Not always with joy, sometimes with discomfort, but it echoes. So when they return, if they do, it's not always with the language you expect. It may not sound like apologies or clear confessions. Sometimes it looks like hesitation, a quiet message, a vague check-in. They aren't asking for you, they're asking if the door to their own reflection is still there. And here's the truth. Whether you let them back in or not, your role in their story is already complete. You were the spark, the disruption, the invitation to depth. That moment in time when everything they thought they understood about themselves cracked just a little. That doesn't need to end in a relationship. It already fulfilled its purpose. Aristotle said that the energy of the mind is the essence of life. And sometimes your energy wakes something in someone that their mind had kept locked away. You didn't push, you didn't try to change them, you simply showed up as you were. And that was enough to shift their emotional architecture. Now, they're left with the weight of what they felt and the realization that they can't unfeel it. They may never find the words for it, but they'll carry it. In how they move through new connections, in what they start to seek, in what they no longer tolerate. Because once someone has experienced a connection that cuts to the soul, surface level won't satisfy anymore. And whether they find their way back to you or not, the truth remains. You left them better than you found them. Not because you saved them, but because you reminded them there was something inside worth saving. Something raw, something honest, something real. Some connections don't come to stay. They come to awaken. And once they do, nothing inside us stays the same. If this stirred something in you, there's a reason. Let it unfold. Let it lead you deeper. There's another video on the screen now that I think your soul is ready for. Take your time, but don't ignore the pull.